So this morning, since we're officially into July and summertime, I wanted to begin by seeing if we could share your best, or perhaps more entertainingly, your worst story of a summer road trip. So if you ever had to go somewhere in the car, cross country, it doesn't have to be long, but tell me a little bit about it. To prime the pump, I was thinking of a fun trip I remember having was Tabitha and I. We just moved to Edmonton, and her college roommate was getting married. I think this must have been the summer of probably 06, 05 or 06. And so we drove down from Edmonton to Denver, and that was good fun. The two of us, we'd hit the road. We were in our little Ford Escort, no AC, no cruise control, which I found out my limit is somewhere around like 10 hours on the road, where my foot will no longer press the gas pedal without cramping. But we had good fun on that. We tented along the way in Tabitha's blue tent that she got. Her parents gave it to her as a graduation present from grade 2. So it was a little tight for the two of us adults, but we had good fun with that. So that was a fun trip for us. That one sticks in my memory for sure. What about you guys? Good memories of road trips? Terrible memories? We'd love to hear those too. Road trips are, I think, interesting to me because it's like, there's a lot of different ways they can go south, and I think sometimes they emphasize our relationships as well, right? Like I think often our good memories of road trips have a lot to do with the people that we're going to go with the road trip on. Maybe just like our bad memories too is like, when people aren't getting along, you don't want to be on that long road trip. I remember being on a road trip with some college friends. We were driving back from Tabitha's parents' place, and I got between her and one of her friends from high school, and I found out that they just loved like literally poking each other all the time, and I'm sitting between them for like 5 hours, and it was not the ideal situation to be. So after about the halfway point, I said, okay, if you guys want to get at each other, I'm just going to sit by the window here, and one of you can be in the middle. And that seemed to work out a bit better. But it's about relationships, I think, ultimately. A lot of the time, whether it's for good or ill, it's about relationships. And I think sometimes friendship is a bit like that as well. And I thought of road trips, obviously it's summer, but sometimes I think we can use that as a metaphor for our friendships as well, because we're kind of going on this journey in life, and we have to think a lot about our traveling companions. Who are the people that are going along on the journey with us? And the question that comes to mind actually is even, are we on the same journey? Are we heading to the same destination? And so this morning, as we continue thinking about friendships, I titled this message "Church Friends," and I think being friends and both being Christians can be a terrific beginning to a friendship, and that's kind of what I want us to walk away with this morning. But we recognize, I think, immediately that just like on a road trip, sometimes our friendships, though we might have great aspirations for them, might not live up to that, even in the context of church. Tanner. Okay, well, we're going to skip past some of the stories now. We're going to get looking at the Bible. But you save that story, and I'll listen to it later, okay? I'll get it from you later, okay, Tanner? So like I said, like relationships, they can kind of go either way, right? And sometimes friendships can be difficult that way. And even friendships with other Christians, church friends, as we sometimes refer to them. And sometimes that can be a derogatory term. Oh, that person isn't really my friend. They're just my church friend. Those relationships get kind of a bad rap, I think. And sometimes rightfully so. Sometimes I think as Christians, we kind of imbibe the culture around us, whether we want to or not. We start to look a lot like our non-Christian neighbors, and we become content with shallow relationships. I think that's something that happens widely in our Canadian culture, is we're very individualistic. I like to be self-sufficient. I don't like to ask for favors from people, and sometimes that limits the kind of relationship that I could have with other people. And sometimes even in church, we settle for shallow relationships. Oh, I see this person once or twice a week. I guess we're friends, and it's like that's something. That's maybe a beginning, but I think often there's something much more that we could have in our friendships. And sometimes it's not that our friendships are shallow. It's in fact that we're so close that the relationship becomes difficult. And I think a lot of us who are over the age of 15 could probably say, yeah, I've been at church where I've had a friend there and the relationship became strained for whatever reason. You know, maybe we were working together on something and just couldn't see eye to eye. Or maybe I was talking behind somebody's back and I'm at fault and we're having a hard time practicing forgiveness. The reality is that friendship is difficult whether we're all Christians or not. But I think the reality is that Jesus imagines a better way for us. I think Scripture holds out a better way for us. It paints a picture of friendship in a redeemed sense, and pictures our relationships in the church in a way that's above that. That's above sort of the bad rap that we might give this term, church friends. So I wanted to flip this morning to Galatians chapter 6. We've looked a lot at the Old Testament and especially what Proverbs has to say. It offers a lot of wisdom about friendship. And the New Testament doesn't speak quite as specifically to friendship outside of what Jesus has to say. But I think, and Paul especially, especially pictures relationships within the church, brother to brother as Christians, sister to sister as Christians, brothers and sisters together. I think Paul imagines those as very deep, rich, and rewarding relationships, and that we would probably tend to label as friendships ourselves. In Galatians chapter 1, verses 1 to 10, I think give us a good description of that. Not so much a command to be friends or maybe even defining it as friendship, but I think in terms of being descriptive of rich relationships, it's really good. So let's read that together. It says, "Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks they are something when they are not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone, without comparing themselves to someone else, for each one should carry their own load. Nevertheless, the one who receives instruction in the word should share all good things with their instructor." Verse 7, "Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers." I think for Paul, when he thinks about the church, I think he's imagining God bringing about a better place in our world. And that may sound like a really vague notion, but I think what he's talking about is the same thing that Jesus talked about when he started saying the kingdom of heaven is near. He's describing a way of living that taps into God's Spirit, that acknowledges the rule of Jesus Christ in our lives in such a way that it transforms not just us and our inner life, but even our relationships and the way that we connect with one another. And so even in that way, I think as we think about being church friends, I think what Paul is imagining is actually that we have a deeper connection with one another than is necessarily available to other people. You know, going back to what C.S. Lewis talks about in friendship in his book The Four Loves, he talks about being friends as being affectionate towards one another, but having something in common, having something that you're looking at together, whether it's a hobby that you both enjoy or just a love of cutting the lawn, whatever it is. It's having something in common and being sort of focused on that more than being focused on each other. And I think what Paul is imagining in Galatians chapter 6 is that the thing that we have in common is Christ. And if that is truly foundational to our lives, then that is the most profound thing that we could have in common. So much deeper than having a shared love for board games or cross-stitching or whatever we could come up with, right? That being the son or daughter of Jesus Christ should be foundational to our lives and should be a profound basis for relationship. This struck home for me. A number of years ago, we were visiting a couple in our church, our last church, and they were an interesting couple to me because, it was always, you see it often of the case of opposites attracting. There's something about pursuing somebody who's a bit of a mystery to you that I think draws a lot of couples together. But these people were like, to me, just sort of like the quintessential example of it. Like just incredibly different people, incredibly different interests. And I was just curious. So we got to know them a bit, and finally I asked them, I said, what is it that kind of drew you two together? Like you don't have shared hobbies. You don't have a lot of shared interests that I can tell. Like what was sort of the connecting thing for you? And they both kind of thought about it for a bit and said, well, I think it was our shared faith in Jesus Christ. She had grown up as a Christian all her life. He had recently become a Christian before they met. Very sort of different paths that way. And I just kind of had to stop and think about that for a bit. It was like, like I think even in my own relationship, in Tabitha and I, is like we have some mutual interests that our relationship, certainly started out on, and certainly our passion for Christ and ministry has been a big part of it. But for them, it was like that was the thing that they could point to. There wasn't really any other sort of supporting structure, and I just thought that's very interesting. I think before that wouldn't have thought about that as a strong enough connection to bear the weight of a marriage relationship. But for them, it 100% worked. And I just thought, that's interesting. It worked, but also my perception that wasn't enough for somebody to get married over, to base a life together on. And it just made me maybe change my thinking a little bit to say, yeah, maybe relationships tied together in Christ, maybe that's actually the best way to go about it. Sometimes when we're looking for friendships, we might say, okay, well, yeah, they're a Christian, but I don't know if I could really stand getting along with that person. Not thinking, actually, no, that's the greatest basis that there ever could be for a friendship. Participating in God's kingdom together. Both being interested, involved in this building a better place in the world, being a part of God's better place in the world, being part of God's kingdom together. What better basis could there be for friendship? And like I said, that's a bit of a change of mind. And as I was thinking this through this week and preparing, I realized I think there's a further change of mind that needs to take place. There's not just to say, okay, well, maybe making a friend at church is, that's the icing on the cake. That's maybe a nice thing that happens, but maybe I need to change my mind to see that, no, actually that's like a requirement almost, right? Like that's that's not just a nice add-in to, showing up at church Sunday mornings and getting to read the Bible and on my own and different things. But maybe that's a fundamental part of what it means to be the church, is to make a truly meaningful friend or friends to walk through life with. And as I thought about that, my mind actually went to Genesis chapter 2. I'm not going to flip there and read the passage, but I think we're all very familiar with the creation story and the fact that Adam is created first, and then in Genesis chapter 2, God parades all the animals in front of him. And Scripture tells us that that's done because Adam was kind of lonely. He needed somebody to be with. And so he's looking for a companion, but he doesn't, of course, find it in any of the animals in Genesis chapter 2. And so finally, Eve is created out of Adam. And then Adam has this interesting sort of expostulation. It just sort of jumps from his lips. He says, finally, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. And God looks on that and says, it's very good. And there's, I think, some... I've typically read that as like that's a mark of sort of completion, like it's finished, it's done now. We've finally arrived at a good place. But what I want to back the truck up a little bit and think about what that means for Adam. Then it means that as long as he is alone, it's not that he is lacking as an individual, but I think there's something about himself that he cannot discover all on his own. He's looking for, not validation, but he's looking for somebody to look at him, to see him, and to experience him. There's a sort of a social aspect to his being that will always be lacking if he's alone. And I think, obviously, we look at Genesis 2 and we say, okay, well, that's maybe a picture of marriage, but I think it's maybe more broadly a picture of relationship, that we don't truly know ourselves until we are in a social relationship, until we're in a friendship, really, which is interesting to me. As I was thinking that through, it's like I usually think about myself in more, this is borrowing science language, I guess, but psychological terms. Like I would consider myself as an individual first and foremost, and as I think about somebody maturing and completing, it is the process of self-discovery that we often think of in maturity. But I think the picture that we get in Genesis 2 is that actually it is in relationship that even ourselves are revealed to ourselves through the other person. Bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. There's something that Adam recognizes about himself in Eve. And I think that maybe gives us a word to consider in our friendships as well. That what we are looking for in a friend ultimately is somebody who is also similar to us. That having a friend reveals something about ourselves as well. And it's only in friendship, it's only in relationship that is revealed to me. And if I'm seeking to answer that question of who am I? Who really am I? We sometimes might imagine that question being answered on a spiritual retreat, going out, standing on the mountaintop or sitting alone in the woods and contemplating that and reflecting that. But the picture that we get from Scripture is that is an incomplete picture, that some of who we are is revealed to us in relationship. And so as I start to wrap my head around that, I realize I need to think about this idea of relationship differently. I need a change of mind. And that's the encouragement we get from Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, of course, right? That we are to renew our thinking and allow Scripture to change the way we think. When was the last time you changed your mind about something? I have a good Christian friend who often says that, it's like reflecting on, I think it's Eugene Peterson's translation of Romans 12, 1 and 2. He literally says, be renewed in your thinking. He says, change your mind about something, right? And I think sometimes as Christians we can get pretty satisfied, maybe, dare I say, even smug about knowing the right way of thinking. And yet Paul calls us to actually, be renewing your mind continually. keep changing your mind and ask yourself, when was the last time I changed my mind on something, right? I think that's a helpful exercise for us as Christians. And so why I bring this Genesis stuff up is to say we need relationships. We need friendships. We need friends who know us truly and thoroughly and can speak to us in ways that allow us to understand more about ourselves. As the proverb put it, as iron sharpens iron. Well, that can only happen if the two metals are actually touching. You know, if I keep my distance from people, if I kind of keep the blade sheathed, as it were, I don't end up sharpened. And I don't end up helping other people either. There's a sense of vulnerability and reality that needs to take place in my church friendships. And then if you're following on the outline, the last thing I put there was, the last point was what I call binding faith. And that might be kind of a scary term for us, binding faith. We don't like being restricted in a lot of ways. We, especially over the last couple of years, it's like we've heard a lot about freedom. And for Christians, of course, we value our freedom in Christ. But what I mean by binding faith is a faith that binds us as Christians together, that holds us together in place. And we want to have that. We want to have such a faith. We want to have such relationships with one another that they support us. One of the images that I often use in premarital counseling with couples is that our relationship together is kind of like a tree or a plant that we've planted together, and like a young tree, we had our grade 1 trees that we planted in our yard, and they're doing fairly well. I think Leafs is taller than I am now. But in the first couple of years, I had to go out and water them regularly and make sure they were well taken care of. And I had the little, and I really don't, my year of landscaping, I don't like the little plastic fence that you put around whatever. I think it looks kind of, I don't know. It sticks out in the yard. It's an eyesore to my mind. But I would put the little white plastic fence around these little saplings in the yard to protect them, to make sure I didn't run over them or maybe a dog would come up or something. You really had to nurse them quite a bit. And sometimes relationships are like that in the beginning, aren't they? We have to take care of them. We have to expend a lot of energy in our relationships for them to grow. But the nice thing about a tree, of course, is that as it grows, it becomes stronger. And in fact, we can sit in its shade after a while. There are times where we still have to maybe do a little bit of pruning or other work, but it's actually the tree that in some sense cares for us. And sometimes that's what happens with our relationships as well. On the front end, there's a lot of work, but eventually they probably get to the point where they will care for us together, right? And I think that's what we're looking for in friendships. It's not just something that I'm going to pour into, but also something that I'm going to receive something from as well. And that's what I think of in binding faith. Is my relationship with somebody, is this friendship with somebody based on the truest thing about me? Is the thing that we hold in common the most foundational? And if this relationship is built on that, and I put in the work, then I can truly experience something profound. But it's kind of dependent even on my own process of, I just took a theological course, so I'll use the big theology term, my sanctification. That is my process of getting to know Jesus Christ more and more. If my relationship with somebody is dependent on my relationship first and foremost with Jesus Christ, then that has to be something pretty real, doesn't it? That can't just be sort of a pretend thing that I do for 2 hours a week. If the thing that we hold in common is Jesus Christ, then I kind of have to be all in there for this other relationship to work on top of it. So that's, I think, what Paul is imagining when he speaks in Galatians chapter 6, especially verse 10. He says, do good to all, but especially those of the household of faith. He's imagining that there's a special connection, and I hope it's more than just imagination. I hope that as Christians we have a special connection, not just with the people in this room, but anybody that calls on the name of the Lord, anybody that could describe themselves as a Christian. I was thinking about this in my own life, and a funny example kind of came up to my mind that I kind of had to laugh when I thought of it, but it revolved around a road trip as well, actually. I was, I guess I must have been about 13 years old, just started grade 8. And in my church growing up, we had a youth group for grades 8 to 12. And so I was like one of the little squirts in the youth group that fall, and probably, I'm sure, annoying to lots of people. But in the fall every year, we were in BC, and so our youth group would take a trip down to Missions Fest in Vancouver for the weekend, and that was one of my last opportunities to have the McPizza. I think one of McDonald's greatest innovations that I think they really ought to have carried on with, but that's another point. How we got down there was actually we had some volunteers, a couple parents or whatever, and we'd all just split up into vehicles and drive down together. I ended up being, I don't know, I wasn't like keen to jump in a vehicle with my best friend or whoever. Maybe they weren't along, I can't remember. So I ended up in a vehicle with this older single lady who volunteered with the youth group, and then two girls that I think were like in grade 11 or grade 12, and me. And at first I was like super weirded out because one of them was like the older sister of a guy that was in my grade, so it was like this weird older sister, younger brother sort of experience or whatever. But I quickly discovered that the two older girls, they were in a small group together with this older lady that was driving us, and they got along famously. They were like peas in a pod. So the 6-hour drive down to Vancouver was mostly me getting grilled about what I liked in girls, was I planning to date anybody that year, who I thought was, of interest in the youth group, and it was just like this interrogation scene for 6 hours, and I'm trapped in the backseat of this little LeBaron. And so they were just cackling with glee by the time they got out. They thought they quit after about an hour or two. They quit referring to me as Tyler. I was just the token male in the car, is what they called me. And honestly, by the time we were driving home, though, we were all laughing. Like, it was kind of weird and awkward at first, but I kind of realized it was like, no, actually, I think what's going on is they actually are treating me like their little brother, which was a weird experience. I have one older brother, no girls born on my dad's side of the family for like 3 or 4 generations, so we're keeping true to the pattern with our family as well. So it was kind of a weird experience for me having any sort of sisterly relationship, but I kind of realized, afterwards, it kind of dawned on me as like that kind of described our relationship. It turned out, in the year to come especially, like these two older girls were kind of looking out for me at youth group a little bit. They were kind of, giving me advice when they thought I needed it, or just listening in a very serious way that otherwise a 12 or 13-year-old boy might not experience from a 17-year-old girl in any other context, right? And I just thought, as I was thinking about it, was like, yeah, I think actually what they were doing, for no other reason that we'd been stuck in a car together because we were all Christians, was they were being my friends. They were being a blessing in my life. And as I look back on it, it was like, yeah, actually, I had a lot of positive experiences that way in my church growing up, and I think that was something that they really fostered well in that youth group. That was a blessing in my life, but it was not one that I earned. It was a gift of grace, wasn't it? And I think ultimately, I hope that's something that we see, is that every friendship we make, and especially those that we make with our church friends, is actually a gift. It's something that we ought to cherish, and we ought to see the potential in them. No, we're not going to be best friends with every single person, even in this room, and certainly not every person who calls themselves a Christian. But I think we should look at every Christian we meet and say, you know what? We both are in Jesus Christ. We both love the Lord, and that is at least the germ, the seed of what could become a terrific friendship. And so I hope we keep that door open in all of our lives. But we're going to see and examine, too, a little bit of what that actually looks like in the next couple months. We're going to take a pause, of course, while I'm away on holidays with Tabitha and the family. But when we come back, we're going to be looking at examples in Scripture of different friendships and seeing just how meaningful they can be, and some of them seeing how sometimes it heads for the ditch. But we're going to look at this picture that we've been given in Scripture of different really meaningful friendships and how they grow to fruition. Let's take a moment and pray, and then we're going to close with a song. Lord, thank you for the gift of friendship, Lord. That there are people in our lives that, if nothing else, at least have the potential to become something more than just acquaintances or companions, however well-intentioned along the way. But there are people that can and will draw near to us and get us, Lord. We thank you first and foremost that we have that in your Son, Jesus Christ. That through his Spirit, we have somebody that sticks closer than a brother, Lord, that loves us in ways that nobody else can. But Lord, we pray too that we would keep the door open to building friendships with other Christians as well, Lord. That we would be looking for that in our lives, Lord. Help us not to be loners, but help us to be open to relationship and to not only being richly blessed in that, but blessing others too. And so I pray that we would be blessed and be a blessing, even just this week, in building friendships with other followers of Jesus Christ. In Jesus' name, amen.